Picture this. It is the middle of August, the kind of heat that settles into the walls and refuses to leave. And you are standing in your kitchen, listening to the air conditioner roar through another afternoon. You already know what is coming, the bill, the one that climbs every single summer while the unit works harder and harder just to keep you from sweating through your shirt. And here is the part that should bother you, that expensive box bolted to the side of your house. The one with the compressor, the refrigerant, the circuit board that fails the moment the warranty expires, is doing a job that human beings figured out how to do thousands of years ago, with nothing but clay and water. I want to show you something today. A method of cooling that uses no compressor, no chemical refrigerant, no complicated electronics, and almost no electricity. A method so simple, so durable, that a version of it kept entire cities livable in some of the hottest places on Earth, long before anyone had ever heard of a power grid. And the best part? You can build a working version of it this weekend for the price of a few garden pots. So let me start where this story actually begins, because the history here matters. Go back to the deserts of ancient Persia and the baking courtyards of Egypt. These were not gentle climates. We are talking about ambient temperatures that regularly pushed past 113 degrees, day after day after day. There was no machine to escape into. Survival was not about comfort, it was about engineering. And the people living there noticed something that we have almost completely forgotten. When you take a porous, unglazed clay jar, fill it with water, and set it in the path of a breeze, the air moving past that jar comes out colder. Not a little colder, noticeably, measurably colder. That single observation became the seed of an entire tradition. In the Middle East, they built the mashrabiyah, those beautiful carved wooden screens you have probably seen in photographs, without ever realizing what they were actually doing. In India, they built the jali, the perforated stone lattices that cooled palaces from the inside. And by roughly 400 BC, the Persians had scaled the whole idea up into something genuinely staggering, the yakhchal, enormous domes of mud brick reaching close to 60 feet into the sky. These were not storage sheds. They were refrigerators, capable of making and storing ice in the middle of a desert summer. Centuries later, the Mughal emperors expanded on the same principles with their ice houses and water houses, using sandstone, insulated cellars, and shallow evaporation pans to manipulate temperature in ways that would embarrass a modern engineer. Now hold on, because I do not want you thinking this is just old history. The principle never stopped working. It was simply pushed aside. And here is exactly why it works. In plain terms, so you understand it instead of just trusting me. It comes down to one law of physics that you cannot argue with. When water evaporates, when it changes from a liquid into a vapor, it must absorb heat to do it. There is no way around that. The energy has to come from somewhere. And in this system, it comes straight out of the air. That is the whole trick. That is evaporative cooling. But the genius is in the clay itself. Unglazed terracotta is not solid. It is riddled with millions of microscopic channels. Wet it down, and those channels behave like a network of tiny pipes, pulling water up and out through the entire body of the pot until every surface is damp. We call that capillary action, and it means the clay essentially keeps itself wet without any help. So now you have a surface that is permanently covered in a thin film of moisture, sitting in moving air, stealing heat with every passing second. Then you take it one step further. Instead of one flat, wet wall, which air just glances off of, you stack the clay into a honeycomb, dozens or hundreds of open tubes packed into a small frame. Why? Surface area. By doing that, you cram an enormous amount of wet clay into a tiny footprint. As hot air gets pulled into those round tubes, the shape forces it to spin and tumble, so that every last molecule of air is driven into contact with the wet walls. And because the openings are narrow, the air actually speeds up as it squeezes through, which makes the water evaporate faster, which drops the temperature even more. That speed-up effect has a name too. It is called the Venturi effect. And it is the same principle behind a garden hose nozzle. By the time the air comes out the far side, it can be 20, 25, even close to 30 degrees cooler than the air that went in. I have seen this principle put to work cooling spaces where conventional air conditioning simply could not keep up. In one case, dropping a room from a brutal 122 degrees down into the 90s. And here's something the machine on your wall will never give you. A standard air conditioner rips moisture out of the air and leaves it dry, stale, and flat. This does the opposite. It adds a gentle, natural humidity, and it carries that clean, earthy smell, the one you get when rain hits dry dirt. There is a real word for that smell, petrichor, and it is not just pleasant. Studies on how we perceive temperature suggest that smell alone makes us feel cooler, beyond what the thermometer is even reading. A plastic box cannot do that. And the energy numbers are where your jaw should drop. Cooling that kind of space mechanically would eat enormous amounts of electricity. Versions of this clay system have done the same job using somewhere around 80% less energy, running on less power than a couple of household light bulbs. Think about that for a second. Industrial strength cooling for pennies an hour. So the obvious question, if it is this good, why is it not in every home in the country? I will give you the honest answer, and it is not some grand conspiracy. It is just economics. There are two real limits, and then there is the reason nobody talks about it. The first limit is climate, and I will be straight with you. Evaporative cooling works best in dry heat. If you live somewhere humid, the air is already holding too much moisture for the water to evaporate efficiently, and you will get less out of it. The Southwest, the dry interior, the desert states, that is the sweet spot. Humid coastal regions, less so. The second limit is that this is a breathing system. It needs a steady exchange of air with the outdoors to work. And our homes for the last 50 years have been built and coded as sealed, airtight boxes that fight against exactly that. But the real reason you have never heard of this is simpler, and it is worth sitting with. There is just no money in it. You cannot build a business model around something a man can make himself, out of dirt, for the cost of a few pots. A modern AC unit is hundreds of moving parts, an annual service call, a full replacement every 10 or 15 years. That is recurring revenue. A stack of clay that lasts half a century and runs on a trickle of water? There is nothing to sell you next year. So the industry simply does not bother, and the knowledge quietly fades, not because it failed, but because nobody could profit from teaching it to you. Well, you do not have to wait for a store to stock it. Here's how you build one yourself, this weekend, and I mean it. Go get unglazed terracotta, plain garden pots, or short clay pipe sections, whatever your local garden center or pottery supply carries. The unglazed part is not optional. If the clay has any decorative glaze or shine on it, the pores are sealed, the water cannot reach the surface, and the whole thing is dead in the water. So check it with your thumb. Raw clay should feel slightly rough and chalky. Arrange those pots into a honeycomb pattern inside a simple wood or metal frame, openings facing out, so air gets pulled through the centers and squeezed against the wet walls. That alone, set in a window or doorway with a breeze, will start working. If you want to do it right, drop a small 12-volt fountain pump into a water reservoir at the base and run a thin line up to the top so it slowly drips water down over the whole stack and keeps the clay saturated all day. And here is the part that turns it into a self-running machine. Wire that little pump to a small 20-watt solar panel. Now think about what that does. The hotter the sun gets, the harder the pump runs, the more water it moves, and the more cooling you get, exactly when you need it most. No thermostat, no programming, no monthly bill. The sun runs it for you. This is a 4,000-year-old answer to a problem we have been overpaying to solve. It tells us we do not have to be chained to the grid to stay comfortable when the heat comes. By understanding how water moves through clay and how evaporation pulls heat right out of the air, you can cool your home for the cost of a weekend project and a little water. A lot of what I cover on this channel got pushed aside for the same reason this did. Not because it stopped working, but because it could not be sold. If that kind of knowledge is worth keeping alive to you, subscribing and sharing is honestly the best way to make sure it does not get buried a second time. And next time, I'm going to show you how this exact same principle of evaporation was turned into a working refrigerator with no electricity at all. A design so cheap and so simple, it changed lives across entire regions. You will not want to miss that one.